Something I really wanted to talk about with Fallout that is frustrating to me in terms of the direction the games have been going is a lack of depth and RPG elements when it comes to decision making. Now here's what I mean by that. When you look at the old games, you look at 1 and 2 and 3 and New Vegas, you look at a lot of these classic Fallout games and the newer 3D style of games, but that are still more seen as classic, one thing that they almost always have in common is trying to make your decisions and choices really matter and affect the world around you. A big issue I have with Fallout 4 is that while your decisions do affect the world around you, while you interact with things like the Institute or the Railroad or even the Brotherhood, they don't exactly change who you are as a person. I mean, Fallout 4 is a game where you can essentially get into Nuka World and end up running a whole gang of raiders and even raiding your past settlements and attacking them if you want to, with no real moral repercussions to your actions. There are some repercussions in the world that actually happen in terms of things changing, like maybe the Brotherhood has a little bit more of a presence, or maybe there's a little bit of different dialogue post-game about synths and stuff like that. But really overall, there's not a big moral dilemma or karma system that actually rewards or punishes you or changes the interactions you have with people depending on what you do. Now, this is part of a trend in Fallout 4 to simplify things in general, and I think that that's really what the problem is a lack of depth, which is something that we can talk about more over in a different video. But today I mainly wanted to focus on karma, because yes, you can get into other systems like how the dialogue tree has been too simplified and how mods were needed to actually make it better in order to tell what you were saying instead of something generic like I'm unhappy, and then it's a whole paragraph that you actually say and you weren't really buying into that. You know, instead of we can talk about those systems, or even the perk tree, like the perk chart, instead of things like the skill systems. Those are an RPG element that we will get to, but really I think the karma is worth focusing on because of how unique it made the games prior to Fallout 4 especially. And then 4 and 76 kind of just ditch that in a lot of ways. They try and pretend that it's happening in the background with world changes, but still it's not really affecting your character. When you look at the karma systems in Fallout, they actually do affect certain things in terms of who you can talk to, what you can do, what kind of person you are, and sometimes what followers will even want to interact with you. An example of this is in Fallout New Vegas, where Cass doesn't really want much to do with you if you have really bad karma. If you're going around doing bad things, this follower doesn't really want to follow you anymore. That's an example of something where you actually have an impact on the game and the gameplay and the type of character you are, depending on what you're doing. There is a real ramification there for doing something bad. Likewise, if you are vilified by any of the factions in Fallout New Vegas, that also ties directly into how the game runs. Now, reputation and karma have always been sort of a staple in Fallout, and that's always worth mentioning. Back all the way to Fallout 1, there was karma and there was reputation. When it went to Fallout 3, there was some simplification where reputation was dropped because you were mainly just working with a karma system, which was good. But when we got back to Fallout New Vegas, the karma and reputation systems were both re-implemented together, with reputation being an extension of the karmic system. Reputation affected who you could talk to, what you could do with them. If you were attacked on sight, maybe you were vilified by a certain group, or if people loved you and they really wanted to be around you and wanted to work with you and almost idolized you. These were very interesting things that tied directly into the world building, lore, and player choice in all of these games except for Fallout 3 up to that point. But when we hit Fallout 4, those systems were dropped for the sake of simplicity, and I think that that was genuinely a pretty big mistake. Say you have a good reputation with the Boomers, or say you have a good reputation with the Strip in Vegas or Freeside, that actually isn't karma itself, but it's almost a subsystem of karma. One of the things I always loved about Fallout New Vegas was it took those ideas, and it actually expanded on them and tried to make them deeper. And one thing that frustrates me a lot about where Fallout went, even though I still love Fallout 4, and I really do enjoy 76 actually in its current state, but one thing that really frustrates me about that more modern Fallout experience is that instead of trying to take those systems and make them deeper, it tried to simplify systems across the board to make them more accessible. I understand the desire to do that, to make your game more accessible to more players, but when you do it, you often lose a lot of the depth and a lot of the personality that actually made the games what they are. It really is a reflection of who your character is in the Wasteland. It's just another extension of the idea of being whoever you want to be in this post-apocalyptic world. Another very interesting example of karma in Fallout New Vegas actually has to do with Legate Lanius. I always say his name wrong, but we're gonna just go with that. At the Battle of Hoover Dam, where if a player can't actually pass the speech and barter checks, they get a unique, special good karma option if they have good karma to convince the legate to fight alone, to convince him to fight honorably. It's very interesting that they actually have effects with the karma, because it's not something that just sits there and does nothing. What's interesting about the depth of Fallout New Vegas, though, is that while they did get reputation right as almost a subsystem of the karma idea, karma itself was still a little bit off. Because of how it works in this game, you can get karma for killing certain enemies like fiends, and that actually boosts your karma an insane amount and makes you good a lot of times no matter what you're doing. And I think that what's frustrating to me is that New Vegas did actually innovate on karma by adding reputation, and they could have taken that a step further and fixed the karma system in the following games instead of just dumping it. When we look back at modern Fallout, even with something like Fallout 3, the effects of good karma were things like accessing 2 different companions, Star Paladin Cross and Fox, actually having Talon Company mercs attack you because they're being hired by someone to kill you, and of course, Megaton citizens awarding the player for good doings with ammo and other random gifts. So those were things that actually did work and help you in the game. Neutral karma caused things like the use of the impartial mediation perk, which is a big skill boost in that game, access to Sergeant RL3, which was really interesting, and a good early game follower, which was Butch. And if you're at neutral karma, you're actually not really attracting any attention in the Wasteland, which is interesting because you're kind of keeping your head down, right? You're kind of keeping your head down and moving through the game. So neither the Talon Company nor the regulators will actually come after the player character to try and kill you in Fallout 3. Then of course you have evil karma, where the regulators will come after you. You can get access to different companions like Clover and Jericho. And of course, there is a slaver in Paradise Falls that will reward you for your wrongdoings with ammo and other gifts. So in Fallout 3, it was almost the perfect balance. Despite a bit of floundering on the karma system, the reputation system is something that adds so much RPG depth to the Fallout universe, and actually makes you think about your decisions and want to do things differently or want to manage things in certain ways. There might not be a real good reason to steal from or attack a certain faction, as it could get you in a lot of trouble with that faction, and that could affect storyline outcomes and quests that you want to do throughout the game, which was really, like I've said a couple times in this video, an extension of the idea of karma, where your decisions directly impacted the way the game would go and what way you would be able to take it and the narrative, and thus also affected what quests you would be doing, because especially in New Vegas, those storylines differ very, very wildly, where you're actually working with someone like the Brotherhood or you're working with someone like the NCR, and if you go too far down a certain path, other factions won't want to work with you, and they won't actually want anything to do with you because of your decision making. This kind of RPG depth, I think, adds a lot to Fallout. It actually makes you want to think, makes you want to make calculated choices and actually decide which way you want to go, instead of the more modern approach of Fallout 4 and Fallout 76 of just working with everyone and no one caring. It's kind of a very big, stark contrast when you look at something like New Vegas, where if you alienate the NCR, they won't help you anymore, or something like Fallout 4, where you can work with things like the Institute, the Brotherhood, and the Railroad, which are all essentially against each other, but you can work with all of them all the way up to essentially the last mission or two, and nobody cares. I think when you start doing that kind of stuff, yes, you're trying to make it accessible so people can access almost everything, but they're still locked out of certain endings depending on what their final choice is. So it really comes off to me like it would be smarter and with a lot more intentionality to actually have them focus on what paths they want to take. It's not that you're limiting decision making by reintroducing things like karma or reintroducing the RPG elements like the reputation system. What you're actually doing is encouraging players to think, encouraging them to want to pursue a certain storyline, want to work with a faction, and because of that you get a better depth of writing and a better feeling of immersion in the player character who feels like they actually got to work alongside that faction or that person for the duration of the game. When you cut that out, you hit a point where yes, it's accessible, but sadly, it also is very much unintentionally directionless. The player knows that they shouldn't be able to work with two factions that hate each other and get no repercussions whatsoever for that for the entire duration of the game. They're not stupid. They do know that in reality things wouldn't work that way, especially in the Wasteland where word does travel around, especially as shown in previous entries, and it just comes off as silly and ridiculous to me. I don't understand why games keep prioritizing accessibility, and not even in the disability way. I understand that, but accessibility in terms of just to casual gamers over the idea of trying to get casual gamers more into their mechanics. Instead of simplifying the game, it's often better to make the game more in-depth and more fun and more alive and encourage players to interact with that, because you can also get those casual players involved and invested, and all of a sudden they're fans for life of your unique franchise that isn't just like everything else. The more these games become homogenous, yes, there are some good ideas that can be gleaned from that. There are good ideas that you can implement from other franchises and things into yours, but you should never really try to be them because you lose the unique identity of what makes you you. And karma, and especially reputation, are things that are associated with the franchise. Those are still things players want to see that give the games depth, and I really do think that bringing them back would be the best for everyone. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content. Let me know what you want to see in the comments down below. Are there any Fallout videos you want to see or anything like that? Interested? As always, have a fantastic day and stay shway.